everybody, and welcome to the third annual Transform Challenging Behavior online conference. Today, we're talking with Dana Abraham about how to get to the root of even the most difficult behavior in your classroom. Hi, Dana.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. I'm really excited to dive into this and share your work with everybody. To kick us off, I want to just read your bio, and I'm going to pull it up my computer and actually read it like word for word, no paraphrase memorized, because I just think it's so well worded. So Dana Abraham, if you don't know Dana, is the founder of the Calm the Chaos framework. She's the author of the Super Kids Activity Guide and the founder of Lemon Lime Adventures. That's a blog. And Dana helps both families and educators unlock the unique superpowers in children so they can live a more peaceful life filled with clarity, connection, and empowerment by providing them with plans to calm the chaos. So, exciting. We're going to get into that, a bunch of that. But before we do, Dana, could you just share with us to start off, how did you come to focus your work on helping children and families and teachers with behavior specifically?
So I think I was born to do this, but I didn't realize that until just recently. I actually was born into a family where my oldest brother is bipolar. And so I was the sibling of a twice exceptional kid who really struggled in school. He was kicked out of almost every school he was ever in. He was extremely aggressive. He struggled to fit in. Even now, as an adult, he still struggles to fit into society and things like that. So that was my very early upbringing. I went into the classroom and I taught for 12 years. I'm a national board certified teacher. And my favorite kiddos were the ones that struggled the most, the ones that were arguing or leaning back in their chair or not sitting still or having meltdowns in the classroom. And it wasn't until I was in a blended classroom that I had a student who came in and his mom told me that he had sensory processing disorder. And I'd never heard of this at the time. And she gave me a blanket and she told me to wrap him like a burrito and turn him upside down. And I was like, I do not know what this woman's talking about. This is so weird. And so I started discovering more and more about this and reading more. And I was like, wait a second, this is my kid. My kid struggles like this as well. And so at the time I had a little guy. He was my firstborn. And for about the first 7 years of his life, despite being a national board certified teacher and doing all my own research and loving struggling kids in the classroom, I felt like I was failing him. He was getting in trouble in preschool, got kicked out of preschool. He was getting suspended in kindergarten. In first grade, it was getting even worse. And so by the time he was in second grade, it became very evident that he didn't fit in a traditional school setting because they just didn't know a lot about how to handle difficult behaviors and where this was coming from. And so I made it my mission to help him fit into a world that didn't understand him and to help him understand his own body so that he didn't have to hate himself for who he was, and he didn't have to hate the world for not understanding him. And so I started homeschooling and blogging at the same time because, I didn't have enough to do and had lost my mind, had a newborn at the same time. And we went through some really rough years. His behavior was so difficult that we ended up with hospital visits, police calls, fire station, all, you think of it probably happened. So, it wore on my marriage, it wore on my relationships with my other kids. And then once we came out on the other side and I started kind of piecing things together and figuring out how we were able to come out on the other side and figure things out, I went back into everything I had learned as a teacher and then all the new research that was out since I had been in the classroom, piecing it all together and started teaching it to my audience and to parents. And that's kind of brings us to where we are today, kind of so that other people don't have to go through that years of struggles and challenges.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, I learned a lot about you in that share. Obviously I've read a bunch of things you wrote and we've talked before, but thank you so much for sharing those personal stories, both in your childhood growing up in your family of origin and with your own child. Yeah. I do have one follow-up question for you about that, specifically about your own child. If I know that you have these super useful and research-based frameworks that you've now created, and we're going to get into those for sure. But if you were to identify like one thing that you think made the biggest difference in turning things around with your child, is there something?
So I've always tried to identify one thing. And I think we all do, right? We try to look for that one thing,
Please.
because if it's one thing, then it's simple and we can all just do that one thing from the beginning. And what we've really come to find is that it's a mixture of about four things. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but really it had to start with me. I had to be able to change my mindset around what was happening, and I had to see possibility. And I had to see that things could get better, and that this wasn't what my life was supposed to be like for the rest of my life, and that I wasn't destined to have a life of stress and chaos and frustration and sadness, and that my son wasn't broken and that I wasn't failing. That was number one. And then once I got past that emotional part, and I still work on that today, right? But once I started getting through that piece, it was really connecting with my son and building up his self-esteem and his self-worth and his value. And so it was connecting on a super deep level, trying to figure out what exactly was behind the behavior in a positive way. So not just like the why the behavior was happening, but what some of this behavior is part of who he is. So what's the flip side of that, and how is that going to help him in the future? Because if I can hone that same behavior, just kind of like the Hulk, if I can help him hone that and use it to propel him in life, then I don't have to actually change who he is. And he gets to love who he is, and he doesn't have to hurt anyone else, hurt himself to get that, his needs met. And then the third piece would be understanding. So truly understanding. This was the piece that was missing as a teacher. We get taught a lot of classroom management skills, and we get taught some very high level things. We also get taught child development, which I think is amazing, right? Like as an early childhood teacher, I think, especially in early childhood, we get taught like the most child development out of all the teachers.
Right.
And so I think that was something that I came into parenting with that a lot of parents don't come in with. But the piece that I didn't have was the way the brain worked, and fight, flight, or freeze, and sensory needs, and anxiety, and all these pieces of the puzzle that I just didn't quite understand were causing a lot of the behaviors. And then the final piece is empowering my kid. If I didn't put it back on him and help him learn to recognize his own needs, help him be self-aware, help him be able to advocate for himself, then none of this would work. He would still, he still would be fighting to be heard and seen.
Okay, not one thing,
Not
four
one,
things.
four.
But maybe the first thing is to work on ourselves and our
I
mindset.
I think it all comes back to yourself, because if you continue, and I see this even, in the classroom, because I know there's a lot of teachers listening, and even in the classroom, if we feel like, it's never going to get better, or, our kids are just, there's a lot of talk about in this day and age, right? These kids, and at home they get this, and so we're up against a wall, or we're up against a huge battle. And if you go into the situation feeling that way, then you're going to get more of that. But if you go into it seeing possibility of, yeah, sure, there's electronics, that's different. Or sure, parents are more busy now, so that's different. And that just means that I've got to take a different approach. It can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Well, and so relatedly, I think some teachers feel really overwhelmed these days. What I hear a lot is that teachers who've been in the field a long time, who feel like there's more kids exhibiting more severe challenging behavior more often, right? So it's multiple children. And I know that in some of the material I read that you've written is that your framework can really help with handling multiple meltdowns at the same time, or working in classrooms where that's the case. So, what would you recommend in terms of how we start thinking about behavior when it is not just one really challenging
Right.
child?
Yeah, so when we're looking at behavior, one of the key things that we have to remember is that behavior is communication. And what that means is that behavior is trying to tell us something. And when it's happening within a whole classroom, it can feel really overwhelming. And one of the things that I teach my students is to hone in on the thing that's causing the most chaos at the time. And so that's where you're going to hone in and put your focus. And you're not ignoring all the other things, but you're just saying, this is the thing I'm going to work on and problem solve. And I might put my focus on here for, a couple of weeks or a month. Now, I'm not, like I said, I'm not ignoring everything else, but that's the thing that I'm going to be doing a little bit more research or reading about, or that's the one struggle that I'm going to be connecting with that one kid just a little bit more. And so the one thing that I like to tell people is, one, that focus, but two is the work you do ahead of time is what's going to make the biggest difference. So in the moment, if you wait until you have a class full of kids who are all struggling, then it's going to be almost too late. So you have to do the prep work of saying, okay, I know in the past I've had a difficult class. I've had, 5 kids or 7 kids who struggle with loud noises, or they struggle with sharing, or they struggle with sitting still. So what can I do ahead of time to set up my classroom so that it will be conducive for those kids? What can I do ahead of time to set the culture in my classroom so the whole class knows what to do when one student struggles? And so when it's that empowerment piece of bringing our kids on board and teaching them kind of the things we already know, but we're teaching it ahead of time to them. So we need a plan. We need a safe place. And sometimes our friends are going to struggle. And when they struggle, this is what we can do to help them, and coming up with a plan together as a class. And even 3-year-olds can do this. 4-year-olds can do this as a class. We do something called a huddle. It's very similar to like a class meeting. So this would be carpet time. You're doing a lot of connecting, teaching the turn taking of conversation. And this is where you could bring that up and say, I know that in preschool, we're all learning how to share, and sometimes that can make us really angry, and so talking about those feelings, and then what can we do if a friend is having a hard time? How can we help them? And so you're just front loading it as much as possible with the kids in your class. So when it happens and there are 3 kids all having a hard time at one time, the rest of the class knows what to do. They know not to engage with those kids. They know to bring one kid his stuffy, or they know to move away from the kid who's got the block in his hand and is like beating them together. And then the 2 kids, let's say, I'm just making up a scenario. Let's say you have 3 kids all fighting in different centers of the, or all at recess. So you would take a moment to help the 2 that are less in fight, flight, or freeze. So the 2 that are less stressed out, that are less overwhelmed, and less in the moment of having the fighting. And you would take care of them, help them get to their safe place, help them get to their calm place, or help them get to a partner or with another teacher that might be in the room. And then you would attend to the one who's struggling the most. So you can put your full attention on that one child who is really having a hard time, who needs you to sit with them, who needs you to breathe next to them, who needs you to model how to get through a really difficult situation.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, that's really a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah. The time you spend taking care of the other kids is going to far outweigh the time it would take if you were trying to take care of all of them at once. It's kind of like when you're cooking Thanksgiving meals, and you can't literally cook all of them at one time. You have to kind of plan out, okay, this one's going to come out of the oven at this time, and this one's going to come out of the oven at this time, and you can't grab them all at once. And so you have to take the one that's easiest to take care of, or doesn't need as much attention, and get that one going, get that one sitting at the back of your burners, and then attend to the one that takes a lot of attention.
Yeah. And I think it's really powerful what you're saying about talk with your class when it's not happening, and before some children are really upset or being aggressive about, that, yeah, this is what we're doing in preschool. We're working on this. And, what can we do in those moments so that you do have the children in your class, most of them, stepping back to give the person space, or they are bringing that stuffy from that the child likes to help them calm down. So then there's, they're helping that friend while you're helping the other one, rather than, everyone acting like this is shocking and unexpected that this happened. And the other kids may then like jump on and seek attention or get too close on purpose to get that reaction, right? So instead you're like, hey, as a community, how are we going to handle this? Yeah, I really like that.
Right. Yeah, and just teaching them to be aware as much as you possibly can at 3 and 4, right? They're all still learning those emotions and self-awareness and self-regulation skills. But if you do that as a whole class, and that not just for the kids who specifically need it.
Right. Well, and if you put that more positive and proactive mindset on, and, they can do a lot at 3 even, right? If you are having these kinds of conversations with them in an ongoing way. So
absolutely. We used this in that first preschool classroom that I was in. And it, like I said, it was a blended classroom. So we had half of our classroom had developmental needs or physical needs, cognitive needs, and then the others were quote unquote typically developing. And so it was a combo class. And we did our huddles in there, and we did problem solving, and we, planned out what to do. When we had one little girl, I remember, who didn't have a lot of communication and a lot of words. And so she would communicate with her hands. And so we had to teach others that, if this friend is coming over and she's hitting you, maybe ask, are you wanting something? Do you need something? Or, practicing how to say, I don't like it when you hit me. Can you, can you just tap me? And so then working with that one child to tap instead of hit. And so you're just working together as a whole class team.
Yeah, it's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to get into this, how do we get to the root of the problem, so to speak? How can we start to, as you said, behaviors communication and understand what the child's communicating? And one of the tools that some people watching probably are familiar with is that ABC approach to observing and documenting behavior. So if you're not familiar, that's the idea that there's the antecedent, or what came before the behavior, that's the A. Then there's the behavior itself, the B, and then the consequence, what happens after. And I thought it was so interesting, Dana. I watched one of your training videos, and you said that approach is, in your mind, a little bit broken. And I think, honestly, a lot of early childhood teachers may not use that language, but sort of have that intuitive or instinctual reaction. And, some of that could be that we are trained in child development, and that ABC framework is more of a behaviorist special ed tool. So we are having like a little philosophy clash there sometimes that doesn't get talked about. But regardless of all that, you have an alternative way of looking at things. So to start off, why do you say that approach is a little bit broken?
So I believe that approach is a little bit broken. I used it in the classroom. I am not a special ed teacher, but like I said, I was in that blended classroom, so I had to learn what that meant. And then when I also taught in I taught up to first grade, and I had to do some of the tracking so that I could take it to the team and things like that. So I knew of it. And what I found, especially once it started getting used for my son, and we were trying to get him some help and supports, is that it became this very isolated incident type of looking at behavior. So it was either it makes it very easy to jump to a conclusion or to make assumptions about why a behavior is happening. And for anyone who's used the ABCs, they know that it's also based in like functions of behavior. And when we look at functions of behavior, it's you're looking for attention, right? You're looking to avoid, or they have added in that you're looking for sensory. And so there's 4 functions to behavior when really there's a much bigger picture going on. We know that, maybe a kid isn't getting enough sleep at home, or maybe they didn't eat breakfast, or maybe they have an internal anxiety or worry because they just left mommy for the first time. And so there's so many aspects and layers, almost like an onion, that you have to unpeel and unravel. And that's kind of what I call it, is unraveling the behavior instead of looking at these isolated incidents. Now we do use, I teach my students to do the 4 W's of when, where, what, and who. Right? Like who's involved, when is it happening, what did the behavior look like, who was involved, and then where is it happening, right? And so you're looking for those patterns, because that's the awesome thing about ABCs, is you're looking for a pattern. Is it happening at the block center? Is it happening right after recess? Is it happening right when they enter the building? Because what happens is a lot of times as parents or educators, it feels like it's always happening, or something is never happening. And so what happens when we start to actually pay attention is we notice that it's happening 3 times a day, or it's happening 5 times a day. And we can find that baseline. So there is that science piece of it, and that, analysis piece is super important for finding the patterns. But what I found with my son was, well, he just wants to play on the iPad. And so that's why he's throwing a fit. Or he just doesn't want to do his schoolwork. And so that's why he's having a meltdown. And I would always say, you're right. He doesn't want to do his math work. But why doesn't he want to do his math work? Right? Or you're right. It is happening at recess. But why is it happening at recess? Right? And it became really clear when at 1:45, I was getting a call from school every day. And these are people who are using the ABCs, and they're tracking my son's behavior. And I walk in, and he's in a glassed-in room, and he's just, the police are there, and he's beating on the window. And they're like, it came out of nowhere. We just don't understand. It literally came out of nowhere. And that's when I started kind of shifting from this, okay, we know it happened at this period of the day, but what's happening before this that we're not looking at? When he is calm, when he is, collaborative, when he is doing the work, when he, is working with other kids, what has happened up until now? And that's when we came up with something that I've now coined the ABC spiral, right? So at the center, we're looking at the ABC of this middle part is the behavior, and you have something that happened right before and something that happens after. But then there was also another ABC that happened probably right before that. And then there was another one, and another one, and another one, right? And if you've ever been to a mall with one of those big like wishing wells where you put the coins in, have you seen those before?
Yeah.
My brother and I used to do that when I was a kid. My dad would take us to McDonald's, and we put the coins in, and we had this race where we would put the coins in on both sides, and we would see who could catch the coin before it would fall in, and then grab it and then do it again. Because once our coin was gone, we didn't get to play anymore. And there was this thing that if you caught too early, you lost. And then if you caught too late, you pushed your coin into the middle. And so I like to look at behavior just like that coin. That it's starting way before we ever even realize. And it's compounding over time of things happening. And if we catch too early, we might not really know the real source. If we make an assumption too early, or we jump to a conclusion too early, we're not actually solving the true root of the problem. But if we catch it too late, our kids are already in fight, flight, or freeze. They're already so far gone that it's just going to make it worse. So the key is to start paying attention to what's been happening long before, so that you can catch it before the tipping point, before it's too late to catch the behavior. So for my son, he would, not get maybe we ran out of cereal, so he had to be flexible for the cereal. And then he went to school and he didn't get to hang his backpack on the backpack hook that he always hangs his backpack on. So he changed the backpack hook, didn't have a problem with it. And then he went to the center and he didn't get to use the math game that he always builds with or he always uses because someone else was using it. So he chose another math game. And so each time he's being flexible, but being flexible is really hard for him.
Yeah.
And so by the time he gets down here, he stops being flexible and he starts getting a little touchy-feely and he starts touching other people's things. And then about here, he starts snapping at people for him when he doesn't get the thing that he's wanting to do. And then by here, he starts pushing them away. And by here, he's hitting. And by here, he's screaming and hitting and throwing. And usually this is where the teachers are joining in, is where he's hitting and kicking and screaming. And it's too late. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you notice the pattern of he's been flexible, and you see that over time, it's easier to teach him how to handle when things don't go his way earlier on. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And obviously, I guess as a classroom teacher, we might not know the part about how he was flexible with the cereal.
Right.
But you do know which of your kids are not that flexible, right? So that if you see them having to be flexible or not getting what they want several times in your morning, you can kind of predict where that's going to go for certain children.
And the truth is, you're not going to have to do this with every kid. I mean, that's the truth, right? Like there's a lot of you that are listening and going, oh my gosh, doing this with 20 children, or 20 children at a time. Like, no. Like you just remember this concept. And then a lot of times it's after the fact, after the first time something happens, you're like, okay, let's see what pieces of the puzzle we can put together and backtrack and try to figure out where it came from instead of a he said, she said, or instead of a like, why are you being so mean? You can start saying, okay, well, what happened before that? And how did that make you feel? And then, well, how did this happen? And sometimes the spiral goes more than just one day, right? Mm-hmm. It might just be like the day before this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And so one thing I do know about early childhood teachers is they know their kids and they're observant and they pay attention. And so if you're just putting those pieces together and you start putting it along that puzzle, it makes it so much easier to start catching it before the tipping point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So well, I know that you have the behavior spiral. So before I ask you the how question, and then you also have something called the behavior funnel. So how do the two go together? And can you tell us a little bit about the behavior funnel as well?
I do. So our behavior spiral is kind of backtracking. I like to consider it, it's the unraveling of the behavior. Right. So we're starting with that epicenter and then we're just like peeling back the layers and we're saying, where did this really start? Mm-hmm. With the behavior funnel, we're taking into account research about child development. We're taking into account what we know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what we know about sensory needs, and we're layering those on top of each other. And I'll be honest, this is something that has been shifted from trial and error over time. Trying to take all the research of like trying to figure out why a kid is doing a certain thing and saying, well, could it be this or could it be that or could it be that? Instead of throwing spaghetti at the wall, it's a very easy way or simple way, not always easy, but it's a simple way to sift through the behavior. And the easiest way to describe it is like mining for gold. And so I have, when you mine for gold, you put a sifter into the riverbank or into the water and you pull it up and you kind of shake it. And then you get another size sifter and it keeps, you keep sifting till you find those nuggets of gold. And it's very similar with a behavior. And I have like a kitchen sink demonstration that I like to do with my students. Do you want me to share?
Yeah. Yes, please. Absolutely.
Okay. So I have this little kitchen sink demonstration. If you consider this jar of goodies, of kitchen materials, as reasons why behavior happens, we have found that you can identify a behavior, like the root cause of a behavior, down to 6 causes. So
can I interrupt you for 1 second, Dana? Because I know everybody loves like a hands-on thing, but just to be super clear, you're not recommending we make those jars and use them with the children.
No.
This is for an illustration for us to understand what you're talking about, right?
I totally forgot I was talking to preschool teachers for a minute and everything.
They're like, yeah, jars, let's do it.
Let's do it. I actually wouldn't discourage it once you truly understand the funnel, because it's a great way to teach your kids how to be self-aware.
Okay.
Right? So everything we do, we like to teach our kids as well. So I'll start with a picture. I'll explain the 6 pieces of the funnel, and then I'll show you kind of what I'm talking about sifting through a behavior.
Okay.
So we have the behavior funnel is here. Hopefully you can see that good enough. And I think we're going to like try to put it on the screen or something. So at the very top of the funnel, I like to think of it like a machine. You're putting the behavior in the top, and then you're letting it go through each layer. So you're not picking and choosing, you're not guessing, you're not assuming, you're just analytically, process of elimination going down the funnel. So you start with basic needs, just like the hierarchy of needs. So this is food, this is water, this is sleep. And with preschool, a lot of that is happening with our preschool kiddos, right? Because they may not have slept well enough. They may not be getting a good nutrition. They may not, because they're still maybe picky in what they eat. It also can be toileting. So if they're learning how to go to the bathroom on their own and recognize their own internal cues, that can be a really difficult transition. And so that basic need of having to go to the bathroom when they need to may not be met yet, right? The one that people forget about is safety. And our preschoolers, a lot of times, don't feel safe because now they're in this brand new place with brand new people, and they've been at home with mama and papa, or they've been at home with their caregiver, and now they're in this whole new world. And so safety is the very first need. The second one is connection. And this one's really important because it's not just connection with the teacher, but it's also connection with other people in the classroom, or connection at home, or connection with their siblings at home. And this is, why we do home visits, or why, we do the surveys for your home, so you can find out like what siblings do you have, and how many homes do you go to? Do the parents work? And so they're barely seeing mom and dad, so all of that kind of plays a role. And what I like to say is you can affect the connection that you're in charge of, right? Like you are only in control of yourself, really. And so you can try to foster connection through all the other places, but you're in charge of the connection you have with that child, if that makes sense. And then next is sensory. And I find that this one gets missed a lot. There's a lot more information about sensory now than there was when I was in the classroom. But this one just gets mixed, like just passed right over a lot of times.
Most teachers don't learn it. It should really be a part of all early childhood teachers learning, I think. It's so useful.
It is really useful. And my students will say that they can typically solve a problem with their kids in the top 3 before ever getting to something in the bottom. Because if you have a child that's avoiding something, are they avoiding it because they don't feel connected? Are they avoiding it because they don't feel safe? Are they avoiding it because it's too loud, or they don't like the sensory feel, right? So it's going to catch a lot of things already. And then we have desires. So it's something they want to do, something they want to get. A lot of times that will already be caught here. And then we have skills at the bottom. Now skills you'll see in avoidance and desires, which is why it's all the way at the bottom. Because if a child is avoiding doing journal time, or they're avoiding doing sign in, or they're avoiding lining up, it may be because they're lacking the skill to line up, or to sit still, or to write, or their fine motor skills. They may be avoiding using their words to communicate because they don't have that skill yet. Does that make sense? So even though skills at the bottom, you'll already catch it in the funnel through avoidance or desires.
Love it.
Yes. So, so back to our, our kitchen sink. So each one of the pieces in my jar represent one of the pieces on the funnel. So we've got our basic needs. We have connection, sensory, avoidance, desires, and then we have skills. And when
it's reversed.
It's reversed. It's just, it could go either way.
Oh, okay.
I just
Okay.
pour them in. Just easiest to see because you can see the layers. If I was to pour them in backwards, it would mix up. And it's really funny because when we have a jar like this, it's easy to figure out if a child hitting is because of a basic need, because it's so pretty. We can just go straight down the list. But the problem with our kids is it's usually all mixed up, and it's so hard. So in order to figure it out and figure out that whole puzzle, we like to pretend like we are sifting this through sifters, different size sifters, ones that have little holes, ones that have medium size holes, ones that have big size holes. And you just sit with one for a while. You sit with basic needs for a while, looking at the data you've been collecting, looking at the ABCs, looking at your spiral, looking at those 4 W's of when it's happening, where it's happening, and looking at what you know about the kids' likes and dislikes. And you're just kind of going through the checklist of, okay, is this child getting enough sleep? How can I help this child get a little bit more sleep? And maybe that just means you have a rest area in your room, or you talk with the parents, or you have a parent education night about the importance of sleep and what time is a good time for kids to go to sleep at that age. So it just gives you a nice place to start. And I've found that that's been really helpful, because otherwise it feels like, I see a lot of people say, well, it could be anything. Every child is unique, and every child is unique, and it could be anything. But this makes it so much simpler to get to what the thing is a lot faster.
So, like with that example of a child who it is a basic need, and it's sleep in particular, I love that you offered 3 things that we could do about that. Talking to the parent one-on-one, creating a rest area in the classroom, or parent education, family education. We could even do all 3. So do you have another example of, because you said you do this with your students, so either for yourself or one of your students, where you did some sifting, and tell us what you came to?
So just recently, and it happened at school as well, her son, my student Ashley, and she has a son, he's a only child. They live in a really small rural place in Canada, and it's really cold there right now. I think it was like negative 40 Celsius recently. And her son, she joined our program because he struggles with being kind of aggressive and hitting mom or hitting others. And that had kind of settled for a while. And all of a sudden he's back at school, and she's getting calls from school. He's getting suspended. He's getting sent home. And so she started doing both things, the spiral and the sifting. And she started saying, okay, well, at home, what can I do to make sure his basic needs are met? And so she started doing all the things she could of making sure he had a high protein diet, making sure he was getting enough rest, making sure that he didn't have any sort of, med sensitivities, because he's a little bit older, right? So, so she's just kind of checking on all those things first. And then she went to the school and she said, okay, well, when is this happening? It's happening right after lunch. Is he eating at lunch? Is he drinking at lunch? Is he going to the bathroom after lunch? Can we just check those things so that we can rule them out? And so then once they sat with that for about a week or 2 weeks, kind of trying to check to see if any of those things needed to be fixed at school or home, then they went on to connection. And she realized that.
Wait, did any of those things need to be fixed?
Yes. So he was he wasn't going to bed on time. He was going to bed really late. Dad worked really late. So he was staying up late to see Dad come home. So they actually had to adjust his schedule at home so that he could see Dad or talk to Dad before going to sleep. And then he had no problem going to sleep. So it was just like a small adjustment. At school, he needed to go to the bathroom, and he wasn't eating his lunch. So they had to kind of check on those things. But the behavior was still happening. And so was he connected? Well, again, Dad was working more, and he wasn't getting as much connection. So they were tweaking that connection. They were doing a game night at home. Mom was doing some reading in bed with him at night. And so things at home were getting a lot better, but at school, he was still struggling. And so he ended up getting a one-on-one aide so that he could have one person to connect with him, to help him when he would go out to recess, because that's where the problem was happening the most. He was pushing girls off the top of the slide. And so he was either pushing or he would hit them. And it was almost always at recess. And so the one-on-one aide would hold him back before everybody else would go out, and just talk with him and pre-plan how he was going to do recess, and kind of watch him and guide him through recess. But the behavior was still happening. So they went to the next level, which was sensory. And they started looking at what was happening. And if you know anything about sensory processing, then you might know that there are more than the 5 senses that we were taught growing up. And one of them is proprioceptive, which is your body awareness. And if you are needing proprioceptive input, you might see a lot more pushing, or a lot of pulling, or a lot of jumping, or a lot of leaning. And so the pushing aspect, right at the top of the slide, right in open space, was a sign. Let's look at this. What would happen if we start adding in some proprioceptive input, meaning that he does wall push-ups before he goes outside, or he does jumping jacks, or that he carries books to the library right before he goes outside? What would happen if we add something like that? And the behavior started to decrease. But at home, right before bed, they were still happening. And mom was like, okay, we finally got it at school. At home, it's still happening. And so we started looking at the spiral of the day, on the days where things would happen. And she said, you know what? I think what I've noticed is he used to go ride his bike and he would play basketball outside, but it's -40 here and he is not going outside. And she had never heard of sensory stuff before all of this. And so she was like, could this be sensory related? And we were like, yes, it could. And so she got a indoor jumping, trampoline. And she started doing body wraps with a blanket before he would go to bed. And he started taking baths for that whole body proprioceptive input instead of the shower. And bedtime started being smooth. He started not having problems at school. And once they hit that sensory piece, it was only about 2 weeks before the behaviors literally disappeared. And so it gives you a place to go instead of picking from everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. Does that make sense how they used both of those?
I think so. Yeah. So it's interesting in the sifting of going through those layers of basic needs and then or connection and then sensory. There actually was things to do or things going on there at each level. So it wasn't just one, right?
Right. And so, but if you're looking at ABCs, you might try one and then go, well, he wants to get his way. So let's maybe add in a reward, or let's add in a consequence, and let's see if that makes a difference. We stop too soon instead of saying, well, no, there's still a reason the behavior is happening. And until we really solve the reason the behavior is happening, it's going to keep happening, no matter how many rewards or consequences you add in.
Right. Because it's almost like, I guess I would say the ABC approach is too simplistic. You're assuming it's just one thing. And whereas we're really very complex as human beings. So, and then it makes me wonder, say we really couldn't, sometimes you're trying to collaborate with a family and it's not going that well, or they're working multiple jobs or whatever's going on in their lives. Or they're struggling with behavior, so they can't figure out how to get their child to bed earlier. But I guess, I'm curious about your thoughts on this. So say you feel like you and the family have recognized together, or even just you as the teacher, that a lack of sleep is probably part of the problem, but you are not able, the family is not able, or they're not on the same page with you in terms of really trying to change that. To me, I would start to think, well, I guess I could go to the next layer, right? See if there's other basic needs and then move on to connection and sensory. What are your feelings on that? Because teachers often feel, I think, they get stuck because they're it is the sleep need and there's nothing I can do, so therefore I can't help with the behavior. What would you say to that?
So I would say, I would first swap that thought. And we'll talk about this later, the thought monsters. I would swap the thought monster that there's nothing I can do about sleep, because that's in the kids, that's at home, right? Like, who am I? I'm a teacher. I can't really help that. But what could you do to help a child who has a lack of sleep, right? Could you provide a quiet place for them to do their work? Could you allow them, could you, have their morning entry be a little calmer and smoother than running in with everybody else? And could you just remember when they are cranky or tired, that they're not a brat, but that they're tired, and that this is kind of what you're going to deal with a little bit. So then what supports can you put in place? How can you teach the rest of the class? How can you teach him or her how to still get what they need at school, even though they are tired? Right? So it's not an excuse. You're not ignoring it, but you're just saying, okay, well, what supports can I put in place? And then knowing that this is a piece of what's happening, what can I do about it? I was talking with a parent of mine, and her son was refusing school. And it was to go to school. He was refusing to go to school. And he's 11. They've been with me for a while, and he had been doing really well. But he's really struggling with the friends at school right now. And so he was having stomach aches. And he would say, I want to go to school, but my stomach just hurts really bad. And so we were trying to come up with ways and systems and tools to get him to school, and to get him to realize that the stomach ache was just anxiety, and let's get over that, and it wasn't until we said, wait a second, what if we just say, okay, the stomach ache's there. It's not going anywhere. It's going to happen, because it's happened for the last 7 days, or actually it had happened for like 3 weeks at this point. It's happened for 3 weeks now. Every morning we go to school. So safe to say tomorrow morning you're going to have a stomach ache. What can we do tomorrow morning, even though you have a stomach ache, to get you to school? And I likened it to like an amputee who loses a leg.
Okay.
I know, sounds crazy, right? But think about it. Like, an amputee who loses a leg has to now decide. They have a choice, because we have choices in life. So they have a choice. They can go through life wishing they had their leg and saying, well, I don't have a leg, I can't do that. Or they could say, you know what? This is the reality. I don't have one of my legs. So what can I do even though I don't have that leg, right? And you've seen, we've all seen amazing feats from, people who have one leg, 2 legs, no legs, and, they're running marathons because they've decided, I'm going to do this thing even though this is my reality. And so if a child's coming and it's a basic needs that's not being met, I've seen so often teachers, and we survey thousands, like probably tens of thousands of teachers. And that's one of the things that I see is the teachers blame parents, and then the parents blame the teachers. And if you just say, you know what, but this is the reality. They're coming home from school tired. That's what a parent could say. What can I do to support them knowing that's going to happen? And then the teachers saying, you know what, they're coming to school tired. What can I do knowing I can't change that? That's kind of the direction I would go with that, instead of deciding that I just can't solve it at all.
Right. That's great. Yeah, that's very powerful, Dana. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this idea of thought monsters. Can you share a little bit more about how you came to coin that phrase and give us some other examples?
Yeah, so I talked about it a little bit at the beginning of when my son was getting kicked out of school, when I'd get a call every day from school. There was this he's never going to listen. He's always going to get
for
kicked
you.
out. Yeah, for me.
For you.
I would have these thoughts of, I'm the worst mom ever. I should know what to do. I should be able to help him. And all that did is make me more upset and make me more sad. It didn't move me towards a solution. It didn't move me towards a better life with my son. It didn't move me towards empowering him. And so there's a lot of research around mindfulness and gratitude and your thoughts and beliefs. And I love, I've actually been doing a lot of studying on beliefs recently. And there's a definition that from Abraham Hicks that a belief is a thought that you just keep thinking.
Right.
And that it's a habit of mind. And then even the Webster Dictionary says that it is a perceived truth that you experience as a truth. And so it's something that you have lived with and you keep saying it and you keep believing it and you keep thinking it. So it keeps happening. And so we discovered that if you start with a thought monster, my kid always hits. Well, do they always hit? Like, did they hit you just now when they gave you a big old hug? No, they didn't, right? And so when you can swap that and start looking for possibility, when you can start looking for room for growth, that's when you'll actually start seeing the growth. So that's kind of where it all started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so earlier you said when you were talking about the example of a child needing connection, you gave an example of one of the your students that they were able to hire or bring in a one-on-one aid for the child. Mm-hmm. So I thought I could see a thought monster that might come up for people is that they might think, well, we can't do that. We don't have money for that at my school, so there's nothing we can do. Right. Would you call that an example?
That is a thought monster,
okay.
Right?
Okay.
We can't do that, right? So it's all or nothing. We can't hire an aide, so we can't do anything. Well, no. You can't, you've never been able to hire an aide before, and so you don't think that that's a possibility. So how could you help this child with more support when you're only one teacher? What could you do? Could you set up a process where the kid comes in and he's close to you, or he's close to the one aide that you have for all the kids? So it gives you room to look for new answers. It opens up your creative mind. And that's what's so powerful about thought monsters. And when I'm teaching my parents this, the always and never monster is like the first one that happens is my kid never listens. My kid always says no. My kid always hits his brother. My kid never eats his food. And so once you start looking for times that they do those things,
right.
Then you can start building on those successes. And you say, oh, well, on Fridays, when he doesn't have to go to school the next day, he is like a love with the rest of his siblings. So I wonder if it's the stress of school. So I can't remove school, but what can I do? I can work on the stress of school. So you're just coming from another angle now.
Yeah. That's great. Well, one thing that's really fun for me is like the connections across sessions with the conference speakers. So two things came to mind as we've been talking that I want to just share with everybody. So one is, since we're talking about connection here, if that idea of connection and feeling like, how can I have the time for the one-on-one connection is of interest to you all watching, I would encourage you to check out Sandy Phoenix's interview because we dive way into connection. And also, Dana, you mentioned before, just offhandedly, but I want to mention this. You mentioned what if the behaviors around handwriting, either I think you said journal or writing.
I did, yeah.
Or signing in. And so actually, Vanessa Levin and I did an interview just on that topic of handwriting and behavior. So that's one to check out for everyone. So just want to give those shout outs, but to everyone. Yeah. But in terms of our conversation, Dana, this is so fantastic. I think it's so useful, these frameworks you're offering us. And so my final question to you is really just, is there anything we haven't touched on yet that you want to make sure everyone attending the conference hears or is thinking about when it comes to behavior?
Well, I think, we talked about how all behavior is communication, that when you see a behavior, there's always a reason behind that behavior. And seeing that reason is not excusing that behavior. It just helps you have empathy towards that behavior and towards that child, and it helps you connect on a deeper level so you can problem solve together. So that's like the first piece. And the second piece is we kind of mentioned sensory, and you said something about how teachers aren't taught that. And that's how I felt when I first discovered it. I was like, what is this secret thing that nobody's telling teachers about? And that would be the one thing is, if you have not heard of sensory processing, or you've heard of it and you thought that it's reserved for kids who have a disability, or kids who have autism or ADHD or sensory processing disorder, and you thought it was reserved for those kids, I just want you to know that we all have sensory preferences, and it is incredibly powerful when you can start to recognize your own sensory preferences, what you avoid and what you seek. So if you're a teacher that gets overtouched, or you're a teacher who it just never seems like the class is quiet enough, it could be that the noises are actually causing you stress. It could be that your tactile sense is overstimulated. And so looking at what you seek and what you avoid, and then what your students seek and avoid, can be really, really helpful in designing a classroom that works together.
Great. Yeah, thank you for bringing in that sensory piece. I will share with everyone that it's interesting. The last 2 years of the conference, I actually each year interviewed an occupational therapist. So we dove really deep into sensory. And this year, I'm not doing that, but it's come up in so many sessions. So I would just encourage you all to like keep your ears perked for that sensory processing or sensory integration dialogue throughout the conference. And we'll also have a lot of great resources in the resource guide. And maybe Dana, I think you have a great resource on sensory processing, so we could include that.
We can.
A link. Yeah, that would be great for folks. Yeah. Well, on that note, what is the best way for folks to learn more about your work or stay in touch with you online, Dana?
Awesome. So the best place, I'm going to give you a special link. You can follow me on my blog, Live and Lime Adventures, on Facebook, or just follow the blog. Or you can go to calmthechaosworkshop.com, and that will sign you up for a newsletter. That will let you know when we have another workshop coming up where we describe the 4 parts and the behavior funnel more in depth, and the pieces of that. And then I actually have a kind of personalized behavior report that I can give you that people can go and download. And I know as a teacher, they're going to want to click all of them. It gives you like 5 choices of, is it aggressive behavior, or is it, defiant behavior, or oversensitive behaviors. Don't worry too much about what you pick. Just pick one, and then we'll send you all 5. So just go ahead and pick the behavior that you're struggling with the most. And we'll give you these reports of what it looks like on the outside, what could possibly be happening under the surface, and then what's the good news about this behavior? Like, what is the superpower that's kind of hiding behind the behavior? And what is 1 or 2 things you can do to start working on that right now?
Great. Yeah, I really encourage you all to click on the link and check it out, because Dana has some really rich and just like lovely to consume online resources. I've watched a bunch of your videos when you've offered them, and it's really good stuff. So I really encourage everyone to check it out and click around to answer those questions. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dana. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you found this talk with Dana valuable, and I'm sure you did, and you would like lifetime access to this video, as well as all the conference videos, be sure to click on the link below and check out the teacher package. And if you decide to invest in the conference package, you'll get information to help you with behavior. You'll get a series of live group coaching calls with me and other conference participants, so you don't have to do it alone. And that is how you get your downloadable certificates. So I know a lot of you need or want those. So check it out, challengingbehaviorconference.com/get more. Thank you so much, Dana. This was really, truly a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your expertise.
Well, it was an honor. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye.